The traffic was heavy on this Thursday morning. Downtown Chicago at its best. Car after car, bumper to bumper, lining up to the traffic lights. People blowing their horns as if it would magically help this pile of steel to move. How is this gonna help us, Mr. Dreager? We've been stuck here for an eternity. The beauty sitting next to me seemed nervous. She was looking out the window and anxiously playing with her silky hair. I can't control traffic, ma'am. Besides, it gives me time to wrap my head around a few things. Am I allowed to ask you a few questions today, or do you still mistrust me? Go ahead, she mumbled, still having her eyes pointed at the passing pedestrians outside. Where do you come from, and how long have you been in this town? Only arrived a few weeks ago, coming all the way from a small European village. You wouldn't even know the area, so don't bother asking. All right, I won't then. And what brought you here? I'm sure it wasn't the lovely landscape of this shithole. Well, the same thing that brings everybody overseas. The dream of making it big. Sing, dance, live a luxurious life, find a nice guy. The usual. And how did that turn out for you? Fantastic, Mr. Dreager. The bodyguards I've hired to protect me are already waiting for me in my 3-store mansion. But my husband is on holidays at the Bermudas, I'm afraid. No reason to get snippy, ma'am. Just making conversation. Meanwhile, at least the traffic was slowly moving again. Did you met some shady people since you've lived here? Mobsters, debt collectors, sketchy businessmen of any sort? Apart from you? No. Not as far as I'm aware. I've tried to keep my head out of the gutter as good as I could. And Frank's Den seemed to you to be the perfect place for that? No, ma'am, absolutely not. The only reason I still go in there is my debt at the bar and the fact that I can eavesdrop on some smaller mobs from time to time. But that's no place for a lady like you. What would be, Mr. Dreager? Another city. We finally left downtown and reached the lakeside. Only a couple of miles to go. Why did you become a detective, Mr. Dreager? She asked me out of the blue. It was the first time she had her eyes on me since we left the apartment. I don't know how that would be any of your concern, ma'am. Wow, weak point it seems. Didn't know you're making such a secret out of this. Sorry, didn't mean to step on your toes. That's okay, let's just forget about this right now. We just passed East Side, and to our left was almost nothing but the calm water of Lake Michigan. But who are we actually looking for? Do you have any idea at all? A murderer, if you need to know. Or at least the one pulling the strings. She did not reply to this at all. But her eyes were telling a different story. Those big, brown, captivating eyes. I knew right away that her mind was racing all over the place in a storm of questions. But the thought of plotted murder made her shiver in fear. Jeffrey Brody, a high animal in railroads, was murdered, so they say. And I was hired to find out who did it and why. And what's all of this got to do with me? Objectively, nothing. But it seems that someone already knows that I'm working on this. And as you said, they saw you talking to me, which makes you likely to be in danger right now. Someone could try to get their hands on you, make you talk, or even worse. But I don't know anything, she insisted. Her voice overturned in fear. I did not mean to scare the poor thing, but I could not leave her in the dark. I know, ma'am, I know, I said, trying to calm her down. And I'm doing the best I can to keep you safe, okay? I guess it would not have been the perfect moment to tell her that I've actually forgot my gun at home, right in the kitchen, hanging in its holster over the chair. That happens when you rip a wreck like me out of his sleep. Now, since we seem to be stuck in this together, would you at least tell me your name? Eleanor. Well, nice to meet you, Eleanor. Please, call me Carl. We just pulled in at the parking lot on Kirkyard. We're here. The freight yard was quite busy by this hour. Workmen were loading and unloading wagons, changing engines or switching out entire trains. All seemed to be as usual, just as if nothing happened. I approached one of the drivers, asking him where I'd find the man in charge. He pointed at the rather low but fairly long office, built entirely out of red brick walls. Some seagulls gathered on its roof, screaming from the top of their tiny lungs. One of the trains was probably loaded on fish or some other treat, perfectly suitable for a flock of birds. The wooden door opened with a squeak, revealing that someone was entering the office. At least they're saving themselves a bill, I thought. May I help you, sir? I was addressed by the secretary. Blonde, early 20s, heels and a perfect yet fake smile. It was pretty obvious she's been told to not let any unrequested visitors in. Yes, ma'am, I hope so. My name is Marcus Boddington, and I'm here to see Mr. Brody, please. I'm afraid to tell you that Mr. Brody passed away recently. Oh dear heavens. How? When? I don't know, sir. They said he died peacefully in his sleep only a couple of days ago. I'm so sorry to hear that, miss. But if I dare to ask, who is running the business now? I have some urgent matter to discuss. Mr. Falcone has stepped in for now until matters have been resolved. Please let me announce your arrival. She entered the red door behind her before inviting us in only a few moments later. Giuliano Falcone. I recognized his face instantly. It was no secret that he's been part of the Cosa Nostra for years, and rumor had it he was sitting pretty high on their payroll. And still the cops did not manage to arrest him yet, or would not dare, which was equally possible. The law has been in the hands of the mafia for quite some time now. Falcone sat on a big brown leather chair, smoking expensive cigars, not even trying to hide the large grid of railroads that's been showing on the map right on his desk. Mr. Boddington, I assume. He did not even bother to stand up or shake my hand, only took a quick glance at me before his eyes wandered to Eleanor. And who are you, my little dove? This is my assistant, Mrs. Napier. Very nice to meet you, Mr. Falcone. Thank you for having me. May I? I pointed at the uncomfortable-looking chair in front of the massive desk, and Falcone waved his hand, signalizing me to lower my ass. Cut to the point, Boddington. I've got work to do. Of course, Mr. Falcone. I was actually looking for Mr. Brody, but I've arrived too late, I'm afraid. Only weeks before his passing, we've been in touch regarding a new deal for shipping freight. Falcone still monitored Eleanor, but I knew exactly that he heard every word I was saying. You see, I work for the State Bank up in Seattle. Mr. Brody and me were discussing ways to move some valuables back and forth between Oregon and Illinois. And what valuables are we talking of, Mr. Boddington? Gold bars, Mr. Falcone. Worth several $1 billion. The gangster barely moved, but his head slowly turned in my direction. And why would you want to ship these with us? Wouldn't it make much more sense to just stick with the National Railroad Company? On a logistic point of view, probably, yes. But my boss always finds ways to cut corners, and in this case, Mr. Brody offered us a financially very interesting deal. All I needed was his signature on the contract, and we would have been ready to go, starting next week already. But unfortunately, I would have to change the whole contract now. If you'd still be interested, of course. I am, Mr. Boddington. Absolutely. Please take care of this bump as quickly as possible. Transport business accepts no delays, and neither do our shareholders. Even in dark times like these, you're asked to return back to me as soon as all is set. Thank you, Mr. Falcone. I will order my assistant to take care of the matter immediately. I tipped my hat and signalized Eleanor to leave, but not before turning around one last time. Apologies, sir, but I'm just too curious. You don't happen to know how Mr. Brody has passed away? Heart attack. His health was not the best. A rather obese man in his 50s, loaded on alcohol and cigars? No wonder he had to leave this world. His eyes pointed at the door. He wanted us to leave instantly. Something smelled fishy here, and it was not the wagons outside. Thank you for your time, sir. Have a great day. Eleanor and I walked away from the office, knowing that Falcone still gazed upon us from his window. I opened the door to my Buick and started the engine. What was that? Eleanor asked. Frankly, I'm not sure. But he knew exactly who I was. We left the parking lot and headed back downtown. Dark clouds were forming up in my head, and they brought more than just rain.